10 minutes. That was the lifespan of my 20-year career. The boardroom was a tomb of glass and steel, overlooking a Chicago skyline that looked colder than usual. Across the mahogany table, Julian, the new CEO, whose suit cost more than the annual salary of my junior analysts, slid a folder toward me. It didn't slide. It glided, weighted by the sheer gravity of what was inside. Transition acknowledgement. The header read, a polite euphemism for a professional execution. I didn't touch it. I watched Julian instead. He sat too straight, his jaw a rigid line of manufactured authority. Beside him, Sarah from HR was a study and avoided eye contact. She was staring at the table's grain as if it held the secrets to the universe. Her shoulders pulled tight. She knew, I am Marianne Caldwell. I've survived 3 mergers, 2 market crashes, and 5 CEOs. I know the smell of a desperate man. And Julian was reeking of it beneath his expensive cologne. I finally flipped to the last page. My eyes didn't linger on the severance numbers. I went straight for the fine print. There it was, Clause 14.3. The signee assumes personal indemnity for all financial disclosures filed during the transition period. My pulse didn't race. It slowed to a cold, rhythmic throb. This wasn't a firing. It was a handoff. They weren't kicking me out. They were piling the legal weight of a $500 million fraud onto my shoulders before shoving me through the door. Julian checked his Patek Philippe. The markets opened in 4 hours. He didn't just need me gone. He needed me to be the owner of the mess he'd spent the last month cooking. 10 minutes. Marianne, he said, his voice dropping into a register of fake empathy. Sign it, and we can make the exit. Graceful. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. He was sweating. A man with a winning hand doesn't check the clock that often. He was terrified I'd read between the lines. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I felt the weight of the ink, the weight of my own freedom. If this paper was my death warrant, why was his hand shaking more than mine? I lowered the nib to the gold embossed line. I wasn't just signing a document. I was choosing which version of the truth would survive the morning. 9 minutes left. He whispered. I looked him dead in the eye and did something he didn't expect. I smiled. The numbers hadn't just changed. They had started to lie. It began as a whisper in the spreadsheet's small surgical shifts in the margins. A decimal point moved here. A risk buffer deleted there. By the time I pulled the full acquisition file at 2 a.m., the whisper had become a scream. The $500 million deal wasn't just aggressive. It was a hollowed-out shell. A financial landmine rigged to detonate 6 months after closing. I traced the digital breadcrumbs. My screen the only light in a darkened office. My stomach turned when I saw the housekeeping. Someone had been backdating my digital credentials. Approval timestamps I never authorized were suddenly blooming across the compliance trail like a digital rash. They weren't just cooking the books, they were using my identity as the chef's apron. If this deal went south and with these numbers, it was a mathematical certainty the trail ended at my desk. A ping shattered the silence. An internal message from the CFO's right-hand man compliance trail updated for the Chicago deal. Just tidying up the loose ends. Marianne, go home. Tidying up is what you do to a crime scene. I realized then that Julian was just the face of the operation. Behind him were the shadow partners, the private equity ghouls who wanted their exit bonuses before the walls caved in. They didn't want my expertise. They wanted my silence, followed by my sacrifice. I didn't save the file. I didn't leave a trace. I simply sat in the dark, watching the cursor blink a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. They had spent weeks building a cage out of my own reputation. The mandatory executive sync invite popped up on my phone for the next morning. No agenda, no witnesses, just a slaughterhouse appointment. I stood up, grabbing my coat. They thought they had me cornered in a numbers game, but they forgot one thing: I'm the one who taught them how to count. The folder waited on the mahogany, angled toward me like a dare. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. The room leaned in. A collective inhalation of held breath. Julian wasn't looking at my face. His eyes were glued to my hand. HR's breathing had gone shallow, a rhythmic panicked wheeze that echoed off the glass walls. "Make it clean. Marianne," Julian murmured, his finger tapping the table. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a man who thought he had already won. I didn't sign my name. Instead, I used my old internal auditor's cipher, a legacy ID code we'd retired 5 years ago, but one that still lived deep in the server's high-risk flag architecture. Beside it, I added a tiny, slanted compliance marker, ref 10K/E. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard professional flourish. To the company's automated risk management system, it was a silent alarm, a duress signal that would immediately freeze any document from being processed for external wire transfers. The pen paused. I felt the vibration of the building, the hum of a $500 million engine about to blow. Then, I finished the stroke and slid the folder back. Julian's smile was sharp, relief cutting through his polished mask. He didn't even look at the signature. He just saw ink, HR, however, went deathly pale. She was the only one old enough to recognize the code. She looked at me, her eyes screaming, but her lips stayed sealed. "Security will escort you out," Julian said, his voice regaining its oily arrogance. "We'll courier your personal effects." I stood before he could finish. I left the pen, my weapon, on the table. As the elevator doors slid shut, I pulled out my burner phone. I sent a single, pre-drafted text to an encrypted line at the SEC and the lead partner of the auditing firm. "Check the metadata on the transition acknowledgement. Look for the E code." The elevator descended, the pressure in my ears shifting. My reflection in the brushed steel was unrecognizable, not a victim, but a ghost in the machine. I had just handed him the rope he'd been begging for, and I had even tied the knot. As I stepped into the lobby, my phone buzzed. The first domino had fallen. They caught me at the edge of the parking garage, their breath huffing in the cold Chicago air. "Marianne, wait." It was David and Elena, my 2 best lieutenants. David already had his lanyard in his hand, his knuckles white. "We're out. If they're cutting you, they're cutting the only person who kept this place honest. We're resigning. Now." Elena nodded, her jaw set. HR can't ignore a mass exodus of the entire senior desk. I didn't smile, though I wanted to. Their loyalty was a rare currency in this building. But right now, it was a currency I couldn't afford to spend on a gesture. "Put your badges back on," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. David blinked, stunned. "You want us to stay? After that public execution? If you walk out now, you're just disgruntled ex-employees. You'll be part of a cultural transition narrative that Julian will spin by lunch." I stepped closer, my reflection ghosting against the garage's concrete pillars. "I don't need martyrs. David, I need witnesses." I saw the realization hit Elena first. Her eyes widened. "Stay," I commanded. "Document every urgent request Julian makes. Every offshore wire transfer he tries to bypass. Every time he asks you to look the other way on the Chicago deal. I want a time-stamped memo sent to your private servers." "You're asking us to sit inside a burning building," Elena whispered. "No," I countered. "I'm asking you to be the ones holding the extinguishers when the investigators arrive. If you leave, he replaces you with people who will help him hide the bodies. Stay. Be the friction in his gears." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the risk I was asking them to take. David slowly clipped his badge back to his belt. It felt like a soldier rearming. "Text me when the first wire fails," I said. "And if anyone mentions my name as the responsible party, record it. Illinois is a 2-party state, but fraud is a federal exception." I got into my car without looking back. As I pulled out, my phone buzzed with an encrypted alert from the audit trail I'd triggered. "Alarm transaction blocked. Reference 10K/E. Internal review initiated." The fire was starting. I just needed my sentinels to make sure it burned the right people. The call came at 11:42 a.m., a jagged, frantic vibration that rattled the coffee cup on my kitchen table. I didn't rush. I watched the caller ID Julian office blink like a warning light before I finally swiped. I didn't say hello. I just listened to his breathing heavy, ragged, the sound of a man who had just seen a ghost. What did you do to the file? Marianne. His voice was a strangled rasp. The oily arrogance from the boardroom had been stripped away, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. I leaned back, watching the sunlight hit the floor. I gave you exactly what you asked for. Julian. My signature. The banks flagged it. He roared, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a glass shattering against a wall. The wire transfer for the Chicago acquisition is in a hard lock. Compliance didn't just flag it, they triggered a coercion protocol. The SEC's automated gateway just swallowed the entire disclosure package. $500 million doesn't just stall, it creates a vacuum that sucks the air out of the building. That's the beauty of the legacy system, I said. My voice as cool as the glass in his office. It's designed to protect the firm from rogue actors. If a senior officer signs under duress using a distress code, the system doesn't just stop the money. It archives every edit made to that file in the last 48 hours, including the backdated timestamps. The silence on the other end was absolute. He wasn't just realizing the deal was dead. He was realizing he had just handed the auditors a map to his own crime. You'll burn with me, he hissed. You signed the indemnity. I signed a digital alarm. Julian, there's a difference. I hung up as a text from Elena flashed on my screen. Audit team just walked into the boardroom. Julian looks like he's having a stroke. What's next? I typed back. Check the unallocated folders. He's going to try to delete the shadow decks. Don't let him. The money had stopped moving. Now, the truth was starting to... The caller ID didn't need a name. I recognized the area code, a private line from a house in the Hamptons I'd visited every summer for a decade. It was Arthur, my mentor, the man who taught me how to read a balance sheet before I could read a room. I answered, my voice a hollow echo. Arthur, you were always my best student. Marianne, he said. His voice as smooth as aged scotch, resilient, precise. That's why it had to be you. I felt the temperature in the room drop. You were in the room when Julian drafted clause 14.3, weren't you? I was the one who suggested it, he replied, without a hint of shame. The Chicago deal is a systemic necessity. The firm stays afloat, the partners stay rich. But the SEC needs a sacrificial lamb to close the file. I chose you because I knew you'd survive the investigation better than anyone else. The betrayal wasn't a knife in the back. It was a calculated business expense. He hadn't sold me out for money. He'd sold me out for stability. What did you get for my career? Arthur, a seat on the global board. Influence Marianne, the kind that protects the next generation. There is no next generation if you burn the foundation to keep the attic warm. I snapped. Don't be emotional. He sighed. The sound of a disappointed teacher. Accept the severance. Take the fall. In 3 years, I'll bring you back as a consultant. This is just theater. Then I hope you enjoy the final act, I said, my thumb hovering over the end button. Because I'm not playing the martyr, I'm playing the whistleblower. Marianne, wait. I cut him off. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My burner phone buzzed an encrypted folder from Elena. Title Project Crown. It was the secret ledger Arthur thought he'd hidden years ago. He hadn't just betrayed me today. He'd been preparing for this theater for years. I opened the file. The first page contained his private signature. I didn't feel like a student anymore. I felt like the prosecutor. The internal servers were screaming. Even if the office remained silent, by Tuesday morning, the polite masks had finally cracked. My sentinels, David, Elena, and 3 others who had joined the silent resistance were being bombarded. The emails had shifted from checking in to immediate action required. Julian was trying to force a mass backdating of the risk assessment logs to cover the holes I'd left. He's cornering me in the break room. Marianne, Elena whispered over an encrypted line, her voice trembling. He said if I don't sign off on the June disclosures, I'm not a team player. He hinted at my pension. He's not asking for teamwork. Elena, I said, staring at the Chicago skyline from my kitchen window. He's asking for an accomplice. If you sign that, you're the one the SEC will come for when the wire fraud charges land. Tell him you'll sign, but only if the request comes through official company email with a CC to legal. He won't do it, she said. Exactly. By noon, the first domino fell. A senior analyst in accounting resigned on the spot after being told to fix the interest projections. Then another. The exodus wasn't a protest. It was an evacuation. Then came the audio file. Elena had left her phone recording during an emergency briefing. Julian's voice was a jagged blade. Marianne Caldwell was a rogue element. He sneered. Her duress code was a desperate attempt to hide her own incompetence. We are the victims here. He was building a public gallows for me. He thought that by being the loudest person in the room, he could rewrite the truth. I didn't panic. I forwarded the recording to the lead investigator at the SEC along with a copy of Project Crown. He thinks control comes from the microphone. I told my team in our group chat. But control comes from the paper trail. Don't argue. Don't fight. Just keep asking for everything in writing. Let the silence do the work. A reply came back from David. He's calling a town hall for 4:00 p.m. He's going to name names. I typed back, let him speak. It's much easier to catch a man when he's busy digging his own grave. It wasn't a riot, it was an eclipse. By Thursday, the office hadn't just lost staff, it had lost its pulse. The silence in the hallways was heavier than any shouting match. One by one, the quiet resignations hit Julian's desk like muffled gunshots. No exit interviews, no emotional goodbyes, just laptops left on empty desks and badges sitting next to cold coffee cups. I sat in my home office, watching the ripple effect on my monitor. The company's internal directory was graying out as IT deactivated accounts. The Chicago deal just hit a terminal wall. David texted me at 2:15 p.m. The lead underwriter called. He asked for you. When Julian told him you were no longer with the firm, the underwriter hung up. 5 minutes later, their formal withdrawal notice hit the portal without my name on the compliance certs. The $500 million deal didn't just stall, it evaporated. Julian had fired the only person the banks actually trusted. And now the banks were clawing their money back. The phone on my desk rang. It was the CEO of our largest client. A man who didn't care about boardroom drama. Only results. Marianne, he said, skipping the pleasantries, I'm looking at a ship with no captain and a hull full of leaks. My board is pulling our portfolio by end of day. Unless you tell me there's a reason to stay. I can't give you that reason, I said. My voice steady. But I can tell you where the lifeboats are. I'll have my lawyers call your new firm. He replied. The weight of it finally settled. This wasn't revenge, it was gravity. You can't remove the foundation and expect the skyscraper to stand just because you're shouting at the clouds. My screen flashed with a final alert from Elena. Emergency board meeting called for 5:00 p.m. Julian is being barred from the floor. Security is standing outside his office. It's over. Marianne. I closed my laptop. The silence in my house was finally peaceful. I wasn't just a former executive anymore. I was the one holding the map to the rubble. They arrived at my doorstep just as the streetlights flickered to life, Julian's legal counsel and the HR director. They looked diminished. The sharp edges of their corporate armor dulled by 48 hours of panic. I didn't invite them into the living room. I led them to the kitchen table, where the light was harsh and unforgiving. The lawyer didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a vellum folder across the wood. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement, heavy on the non and a check. The amount was already filled in. It was more than I'd earned in the last 5 years combined. This is a global settlement. Marianne, the lawyer said, his voice strained. It covers everything. The termination, the Chicago deal, and a lifetime mutual non-disparagement clause. Sign it, and the SEC investigation becomes a private internal matter. I didn't look at the numbers. I looked at Sarah, the HR director. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't here for the company. She was here because she realized her signature was on the same forged documents as Julian's. You're not buying my silence, I said, pushing the check back with a single finger. You're trying to buy your way out of a subpoena. Don't be sanctimonious, the lawyer hissed, leaning in. This money secures your family's future. If you refuse, the litigation will last a decade. We will bury you in discovery. You can't bury someone who has already walked out of the grave, I replied. I've already turned over the Project Crown files. The discovery has already happened. You're just waiting for the knock on the door. Sarah's phone chimed a sharp, frantic sound. She looked at the screen, and the little color left in her face vanished. The board just revoked Julian's indemnity, she whispered. They're handing him over. The lawyer stood up so fast his chair screeched against the tile. The global settlement was suddenly a worthless piece of paper. They didn't even take the check when they left. They just scrambled for the door. Two people realizing they were on the wrong side of history. I watched their taillights disappear. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I'm at the front gate. I have the rest of the ledger. Arthur. The architect was ready to talk. The news didn't break with a bang. It arrived with a funeral-like silence. Julian was removed for health reasons. The corporate euphemism for a legal radioactive leak. The $500 million acquisition didn't just fail. It was absorbed by the very private equity firm I had secretly joined as a strategic partner. 1 week later, I walked back into that boardroom. The glass walls were the same, but the air felt different, thinner, cleaner. Julian was there, sitting in the visitor chair I had occupied when he fired me. He looked 10 years older. His expensive suit hanging off a frame that had lost its posture. Arthur, my mentor, sat in the corner, a ghost of a man watching his protege take the head of the table. Julian slid a single sheet of paper toward me. Mutual civil immunity, he rasped. The board agreed. If you sign this, the firm drops all internal claims against your distress code usage. And in exchange, you agree not to testify in the civil suit regarding the backdating. He pushed a pen toward me. It was the same gold-nibbed pen I'd left on this table 10 days ago. Sign it, Marianne. Arthur added from the shadows, his voice a plea. Let's end this theater. Everyone gets to move on. I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen. Then, I looked Julian directly in the eye. I learned a valuable lesson in this room, I said, my voice echoing with a calm that terrified them. I learned that a signature isn't just ink. It's a transfer of soul. You didn't want my cooperation. You wanted my ghost to haunt the evidence so you could walk away clean. I stood up, leaving the folder closed and the pen untouched. I won't be signing, I said. I've already spent 20 years carrying the weight of men who were too afraid to carry their own. I'm done. As I walked out, Julian's hand hovered over the paper, trembling. He was a man with all the money in the world and no way to buy his way back into the light. I stepped onto the Chicago sidewalk and took a breath of the freezing, honest air. I didn't have a settlement check. I didn't have an NDA. What I had was my name untainted, unbought, and entirely mine. True power isn't in what you're willing to sign. It's in knowing exactly when to set the pen down and walk away.